Well, it looks like Donald Trump has had another revelation about the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. However, it's unclear how long it will last. Today, Donald Trump said that his last phone conversation with Putin on June 4th was good, but he said that so far the conversation hasn't brought any results. And he started complaining that so far nothing has come out of it. Everything they talked about with Putin hasn't worked out yet. Nothing is happening at all. And that's why he's complaining, saying that it seems like Putin is really leading him on again. But let me remind you that after that conversation on June 4th, Trump personally said it was a wonderful conversation, that they discussed a lot of issues. Now everything will be decided, now everything will go just perfectly because they agreed on something. But that's when Trump first said that Ukraine was to blame for attacking Russia. And he says that now Putin has a reason to attack Ukraine even more massively after Ukraine attacked Russian airfields. Well, there you go. And now, many people say that Trump, of course, criticizes both the president of Ukraine and Russia, but he is specifically hostile towards Zelensky and calls Zelensky a bad guy. Let's review everything in detail, as he did something quite fascinating today. He says, the conversation was good, but nothing came of it yet. My name is Alexei Pechi. Next, let's go through everything step by step. Before we start, subscribe to the channel, like this episode, and leave any comment you want. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechenyu. The link to it is in the description of this video. So Donald Trump today called his last phone conversation with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin good, but noted that so far this conversation has not brought any results. As he stated, we had a good conversation, but so far nothing has come of it. Then Trump said that he mainly talked with Putin about Russia's war against Ukraine and about ways to resolve it. He also noted that he had a good relationship with the Russian president. And wars like the one against Ukraine, as well as other conflicts, might not have happened if the results of the United States presidential elections had been different. In the year 2020, well, here we go again. If I had been president, this wouldn't have happened. In that election, Trump lost in 2020, but in the interview, he once again called the results rigged. And I'll give you another quote from Trump. Listen, I had a great relationship with Putin, and this war of Russia against Ukraine would never have happened if the elections hadn't been rigged. There wouldn't be inflation, there wouldn't be war with Israel, there wouldn't be problems, because Iran wouldn't have had any money. They, meaning the authorities of Iran, were bankrupt. They weren't financing Hamas or Hezbollah. There wouldn't have been this disgrace in Afghanistan, one of the most humiliating moments in the history of our country. So, let me point out right away that, first of all, at the time of Donald Trump's first presidency, Russia's war against Ukraine was already ongoing. But it actually started in 2014, just a reminder, especially for Trump and the Trump supporters. Secondly, the Afghanistan disgrace would not have occurred. So let me remind you that it was Donald Trump who signed the agreement with the Taliban for the withdrawal of American troops from Afghanistan. If anyone doesn't remember, just Google it and read about it. There you go. As for Iran, I can partly agree here because yes, indeed, Iran was weaker at that time. But let's get back to the conversation between Putin and Trump. Let me remind you that on June 4th, Putin and Trump had their fourth phone conversation since the beginning of this year, and it lasted about an hour. The presidents discussed the outcome of the second round of direct Russia-Ukraine talks held in Istanbul, as well as Ukraine's attacks on Russian airfields and the new nuclear deal with Iran. And that's when the head of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Sergei Lavrov, said that Trump and Putin don't need any preliminaries in their conversations. He noted that such a working relationship has developed between the presidents of the United States and Russia that both, when starting a phone conversation with each other, immediately get down to business. Well, they just greet each other politely. Let me remind you that Trump called Putin crazy and said that something was wrong with him, but it turns out that's not the case. But here's another interesting point, because on June 4th, the same Trump discussed with Putin the security service of Ukraine strikes on the strategic aviation of the Russian Federation. That's it. And according to Trump, he and Putin discussed, quote, Ukraine's attack on Russian planes that were parked, as well as various other attacks carried out by both sides. It was a good conversation, but wouldn't lead to immediate peace. Putin stated very firmly that he would be forced to respond to the recent attack on the airfields. In addition, Trump went on to say that they discussed Iran and Iran's nuclear weapons. Quote, "I told President Putin that Iran cannot have nuclear weapons, and on this issue, I believe we agreed." President Putin offered to take part in negotiations with Iran and possibly help resolve this issue more quickly. I believe that Iran is delaying making a decision on this very important issue, and we need a final answer in a very short time. I recorded a separate episode on the Iranian negotiations. Check it out, it's available. Trump says that he's no longer sure if any deal with Iran can be reached at all, and he says the Iranians are behaving very aggressively. And in this context, I like this temporary clarity in Donald Trump's thinking when he says that, well, we talked, but there are no results yet, because even on June 5th, after the conversation between Trump and Putin, I liked the article back then that said Trump was irritated with both Zelensky and Putin. However, he has long harbored a particular animosity towards Ukraine's president, Volodymyr Zelensky. In particular, Trump talked about stopping arms supplies to Ukraine and repeatedly stated that Zelensky is a bad guy who is bringing the world to the brink of nuclear war. At the same time, Trump has said that he understands Ukraine, which is fighting against an enemy determined to keep shelling its cities. As was written at the time, Trump generally treats Putin, the aggressor in this conflict, with more respect, although he sometimes expresses his disappointment. But his disappointment is meaningless, as we already know. Before taking office, he promised to quickly put an end to the war, referring to what he called very, very good relations with the Russian leader. The United States president reportedly wanted to impose more sanctions on Russia, but has not yet acted. In addition, Trump did not say whether he would support the bipartisan Senate bill, initiated by his ally and Republican Lindsey Graham, which provides for tough economic sanctions against Russia. At the same time, the American leader recently, at the beginning of this month, shared on social media an article by columnist Mark Thiessen, who noted that the sanctions bill would give Trump leverage over Putin. But then, when he was asked if he would impose sanctions, he said, "I'll answer that question in 2 weeks." So, in the next 2 weeks, I'll figure out whether Putin wants peace or not. Well, a week has already passed, a whole week has definitely passed, and Trump says, well, sorry, there are no results yet. And at the end of this episode, I want to share another quote from John Brennan, the former director of the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States of America. And he says that the intensity of the fighting between Russia and Ukraine is only increasing. And it doesn't seem like Trump, who promised to end the war in 24 hours, actually has any real plan for achieving true peace. Quote, "I think that Donald Trump doesn't know what he's going to do next. He doesn't know how he will act to end the war in Ukraine." And also, the former head of the CIA believes that Trump has a naive and superficial perception of Ukraine and Vladimir Putin. Brennan has a good grasp of the realities of the Russia-Ukraine war, because it was during his tenure, and he was the director of the CIA from 2013 to 2017, it was during his tenure that the CIA began helping Ukraine to create its own modern intelligence service. And according to him, in 2014, when he first visited Ukraine, the Ukrainian army was still infiltrated by Russian agents. But now everything is completely different. Quote, "Step by step. It surpasses almost any other army on the planet, I would say, including the United States of America, considering the vast experience they have gained on the battlefield. But nevertheless, Trump is still not ready to provide more assistance to Ukraine just to force Putin to sit down at the negotiating table and conduct proper negotiations." But at the end, I'll add one more piece of news. This is Alexander Stubb. It was announced today by the president of Finland, who, by the way, has rather close ties with Trump. And today he stated that in his last conversation with him, Trump convinced him that he has no intention of leaving the negotiation process. He might make threats, but he won't actually leave. However, no one understands what this negotiation process will look like moving forward, because Russia is simply putting forward wild, insane ultimatums. I'll leave it at that, friends. As always, share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to give a like.